Hey, how's it going guys? Welcome back, and in this episode we're going to be improving our shooting mechanics, and we're going to be adding new weapon types as well as wall buys to be able to switch them. So let's get straight to it. Alright guys, so first thing we need to do is just head over to our player billboard, and just make sure you have these variables here, so just make sure you have a fire rate, and then we also want to add a new variable, and we'll just call this weapon type. We can keep this a number, and we'll default this on 1, and what we're going to do is, so we're going to use this to add checks for each different weapon type, so the first default one will be 1, and then when you go to different wall buys, we'll set that to 2, 3, 4, etc. And then based on that weapon type, we'll change variables such as the speed, the fire rate, things like that. Next, let's head over to our event sheet. We're going to go to where your bullet logic is, or wherever your damage logic is. And here where we have every 0.6 seconds, if you've got it the same as I do, we're going to change this to every, so what we're going to do is instead of every X seconds, we're going to set this to player billboard dot fire rate. So now what we can do is, so we can now update the so we can keep the bullets logic the same, so we're still just spawning that same object, but now what we can do is we can just change this variable, and then also we could add conditions to check, so if it is a different, weapon type, we could also then just reskin it with different textures and things like that. So you don't have to, create different bullets for each different weapon. Obviously for certain types of, effects you might need to do this, but I think this is a much more optimized way of doing it. Alright guys, so the next thing we can do is, so for these wall buys, we could basically replicate the same process we did for adding the door. And so we could actually clone these objects here, and we can just basically, instead of calling them doors, we'll make them wall buys. So we're going to need two 3D objects, a sprite, and then a text object. So insert an object, 3D shape, we can call this wall buy, we can add an instance variable, and we can just call this weapon. We'll call it weapon number, and then we can use this to compare and make it match, the weapon type to the player. And then we also just want to add another instance variable, and we can just call this cost, just like we did with the door. Also, I'll rename this to weapon buy actually, just so it's more clear. But weapon buy. And then what we're going to do is, so if to have all the different, weapon types, let's say you have an image for each one, we'll need to create a different sprite for each weapon type, just like we did the pickups. So we'll add a new object, sprite. Alright, real quick for this example, I've just, dragged a couple different circles, and, we can just call this like a different fireball or something like that. And then this, we can just call this like weapon 1 underscore texture, something like that. We can right click and we can clone this for now, just so we've got a different object. We want to just be showing the bottom face, and then we can just click at the bottom, and we can now set this to the new texture, weapon texture. Let's also add a sign behavior. We'll set this to Z-axis, Z elevation. We want to make sure it's not enabled at first, and we can set the magnitude to 2. So now we preview it, it's just going to add a little sign, and what we can do is we can make it so that when you're in a collision, it'll sign just to, be like signal like, hey, you are entering this interaction. And for this here, so if this is the where we'll make this weapon 1, so we'll say weapon number 1, and then we could make this cost 50, something like that. And this is up to you how you visually want to, display these weapons types. So I'm just thinking for now we'll just place this against a wall, and this can move. And then just like the door, we could do something similar. So we do need the collision. We'll add a sprite. I'll make us a different color to the door. And we can just call this weapon by underscore collision, something like that. Make sure these objects are on the game layer, and then we can just align them. Alright guys, so I've just selected these two objects. I'm going to drag them onto the scene so we can get a better idea of how this is going to look. I'm actually going to change this, so for the different ones, so if this is going to be against the back wall, I'll actually change this face to be on the back on the top face. So if we change this out, we can clear this selection here, and then we'll change it for the top one. And then this will just look a bit nice, it'll look a bit more against the wall. We can then select the collision and just place this so make this however large you want it to be. Once you're happy with that, we can just lock this for now. Select your weapon buy, and just like the door, we're going to create a container. So we'll create a container, and then just select the weapon buy collision. We can now just get this collision, and we can take this back up here. For this as well, I'm actually going to remove the sign behavior for now, just to keep it more simple, as we're also going to have the sign behavior on the interaction. So this could maybe just be like a texture on a wall, like in Call of Duty Zombies, something like that. I'm also going to reduce the height a little to like 10, and I'll set the elevation to 1. I'll preview this here, and as you can see, it spawns a collision, and we have this here. So that's just to test that we've got something. And I've just changed the C elevation to 5, so it's a bit higher up. Let's now add the other UI elements for the touch interaction and the price. So we can just clone this object here, and we can just call this weapon buy instead. So we've got weapon buy UI. We can keep everything else the same. We can do the same thing with the text. Clone object. And again, just make this weapon. Also, real quick, we just want to, so for the weapon by collision, we also want to, just like the door, we want to add a pin behavior. So behavior, pin, variable, boolean, on collision. And then just make sure destroy on pinned object is true. Alright, great. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to Control C and Control V, and I'm just going to duplicate the doors folder, as a lot of this seems to be overlapping. We can edit this and rename it just to weapons, weapon buys maybe. So we'll call this weapon buys. And what we could do is, so for example, we have here collision with door collision. We can just change all these out. So we can say weapon collision. And then we want to create these same objects, but we want to create the UI. So we want to say weapon UI. And then instead of on the door X, we want this to be on weapon by X. Like this. Same for the door. We want the weapon text. And then again, weapon by .x, weapon by .y. So just like here with the door by text, we can just now, so real quick, you can then just select all these and replace them with the new weapon by text. And then once you've done that, you can just also, instead of door.cost, we can now obviously change this to weapon cost. So we can say weapon by .cost. Like this. So that should now function just like the door. And then again, we can just keep going down and just replacing these. So instead of door collision, we want weapon collision. We don't want to destroy the door, we want to destroy the weapon UI. And then the weapon text. And then so here, we want to tap on the weapon UI, weapon by UI. We want to set the cost, and we want to set that to weapon by minus cost. So we say weapon by dot cost, so coins minus weapon by dot cost. This event here, this is up to you if you want to destroy the buy afterwards. So I'm just going to keep the weapon buy there. What you could do is you could also add a boolean and check and just maybe disable it if they already have that weapon. I'll also be improving this system down the line. If people, if this gets more traction and you guys enjoy this sort of system, we'll also be able to, greatly improve on this weapon system. I'm just trying to get the, foundation set up first for swapping the weapons, and then we can just keep building it in the future. So for now, I'm going to delete that. We don't need this for now. And then what we'll do actually in this event is we'll keep this more simple for now. And what we can do is we can just add a bunch of blank sub events. And so in here, this is so just to give you an example of how what you could do is, because this is on it's on an action, right? So it's only going to get triggered once whilst true anyways. So what we could do is, so when you tap onto this, we could add a condition. We can compare two values. And all we can do is, so we can say weapon by dot weapon number. So we can say if the weapon number equals 2, and then we can just simply add these checks. So we could say if it's weapon 1, 2, 3, for example. And then inside of each one of these, you can now add all your different actions to of what you want to actually update your weapon to. So we could change things like the damage, speed, and the fire rate. So we could say add action. We could say player billboard, set value. For now, I'll just copy these out. So we could do that. We could change the damage, fire rate, and the speed. You could also change the range, and this is why we added all these different variables here. And then it's just everything's nice and contained. So for this one, we could make this one more like a machine gun or something, or flamethrower. Maybe it'd look more like. We could set this to maybe 10. The damage we could make it, and again, so it depends. If you shot it faster, you could reduce the damage. We could change the range, set that to like 120, something like that. And then this will all be conditional on what you guys actually want your weapons to do. And also, if you've been following along, we did set this up to automatically lock onto enemies and hit target them. So again, if you wanted to change that, you could add some different varieties of weapon types, and then you just change that to follow the mouse cursor instead. So I'm just trying to give you guys options and just make sure so like you can follow along, but it's also great to try and also figure out what you actually want this project to do. Because if you got to this stage, then you've already kind of built up quite a good foundation now for creating a top-down show. But yeah, anyway, so off the top of my head, I'm just trying to show you some things we could do. So we could even change the bullet, for example. We could maybe change the bullet, and we could also just set the speed. So we could set the speed to be faster. So before it was 400, so if we doubled this, we made it 800. But anyways, yeah, and then on top of this, if you want to be able to add additional functionalities, or you want to trigger additional events based on different weapon types, what we could do is we could also, so instead we could say player collision, or player billboard, sorry. You could set value, and you could actually set the weapon type. So you could set the weapon type to 1, and then for example, just like these, you could set, you know, set it to 2, 3, etc. And then that just allows for additional checks and things like that, you know, if you want to add different events. So then you've also got a weapon type afterwards attached to your player. Alright guys, and then real quick for this example, I'll show us 2 different options. So I've selected this, I pasted it out, and then all I've done is I've just set the weapon number to 2. We could change the cost as well, it's up to you. And then we've just changed the texture, so I've just made it purple. We could then copy these, paste these in here. Let's say I want to set this to a much slower speed, so we set this to 300. The damage could be much higher though, so we could set it to 50. The fire rate would be much slower, to 3. And then but maybe this would be more like a sniper, so the range would be much higher. Alright guys, so real quick, I just noticed a flaw in this system, so I just quickly fixed it. What we need to do is, so if you just pause the video and you just copy here, we just want to make sure, so we're keeping it the same when you tap on the UI. All this is the same. The only thing we need to do is, just like with the door, we need to also, so afterwards, we need to right click. We're going to add another blank sub event, which is this here. And then we're going to say weapon by. We're going to pick nearest to the player collision X and Y. Again, just like the door. But instead of destroying, what we're going to do is we're then going to set the player billboard's weapon type variable. We're going to set that to the weapon by weapon number variable. So for example, if it was, you know, weapon 1, we'd set it to 1. And then again, just right click, add another blank sub event. And inside this one, we're then going to add the checks for the weapon type. So we're going to say compare value on the actual player billboard. So we say player billboard, compare instance variable, and then we're just going to say weapon type is equal to 1. And then you'll just duplicate for this for your different weapons. And inside of these is where you'll set all your different stuff. So, and then on top of this, so, you know, play around with this, guys. There's a lot of things you could add in here. You could change the colors, you could change the size, all sorts. I just didn't want to, you know, go in too long on this video, as it, you know, it's a bit of a complex thing. And I'm also going to, you know, I'm going to create new videos in the future where we're going to really build on this system. Alright guys, so as you can see, we have our 2 objects here. It shows the price. When we click on these, it then changes the speed. So for example, this is weapon 1. And as you can see, it's more like a flamethrower or a machine gun. And then when we click on the second one, it's now changed this to a much slower, but stronger weapon. Alright, that's it for this one, guys. It's quite a basic system so far, but we're going to build on this in the future, and we'll add a lot more weapons and effects, things like that. I hope you enjoyed, I hope it helped, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.